Hello everyone, this is MMBS111, Introductory Microbiology, and today we're going to be reviewing section 12.1 and discussing defense mechanisms in the human body. There are 4 learning outcomes for this mini lecture. First, summarize the 3 lines of host defenses. Second, know the components of the first line of defense. Third, describe 2 examples of how the normal microbiota contribute to the first line of defense. And 4, identify some of the chemicals used in the first line of defense. So we're really going to be focusing on innate immunity in this chapter. And there are a number of lines of defense that our body uses in order to protect us from infection and remove any organisms that happen to get through some of those defenses. And each line of defense has a different sort of characteristics, different structures that contribute to those defense mechanisms. So the first line of defense includes any barrier that blocks invasion at a portal of entry. The first line of defense is designed to limit access to internal body tissues. It's not really considered a true immune response because it doesn't involve the recognition of any foreign substances, so it's not selective. The second line of defense is an internalized system that includes specific cells and some fluids. It includes the processes of inflammation as well as phagocytosis, and it acts rapidly at both the local and systemic levels. So if there's like a local infection, it's limited to a specific location. Systemic, we're talking about throughout the body. And this line of defense is going to be activated if any foreign bodies get through the first line of defense. The third line of defense is what we call acquired immunity. So the first and second lines of defense are also known as innate immunity. They are systems of immunity that you are born with. The third line of defense is acquired, and that means that it develops after you are born. It reacts to each foreign substance individually, and the reaction with each of those organisms produces unique protective substances. And acquired immunity results in long-term immunity. Most of these defense lines overlap and are redundant in some of their effects. And that helps to reduce the ability of microbes to survive. So if they get through the first line of defense, there are redundant systems in the second and third line of defense that will target those microorganisms. This diagram is from your text, and it just breaks down those lines of defense in the immune system. You can see the first and second lines of defense are innate. They're not specific, so they don't recognize specific agents. And then you can see the subsystems that are included as part of each of those lines of defense. And then the acquired immunity is that third line of defense, and you can see the cells there that are involved in that response. So there are a number of physical structures that are part of this first line of defense. The skin is one of those. The outer layer of skin is called the stratum corneum, and it is a very tough layer of skin. It is composed of keratinized squamous epithelium. This helps it to resist abrasion. It's also waterproof, and it is particularly thick on the palms of the hands and soles of the feet. And it is impervious to penetration by microorganisms as long as it's intact. The constant sloughing or shedding of skin cells also helps to remove microbes, because any microbes that are attached to those cells are also removed when that skin sloughs off. Sweat is also antimicrobial, so the release of sweat from the pores helps to clear the pores of any microorganisms. And the low pH of the skin. So skin and sweat is more acidic, and most microorganisms cannot tolerate an acidic environment, so that also helps to remove microbes. All of the mucous membranes of the body are also components of this first line of defense. That mucus that coats those membranes helps to trap any microorganisms that may enter. And then the action of coughing or sneezing helps to remove them from the body. Also, the action of blinking and tear production is also antimicrobic. The blinking helps to remove any organisms that are on the surface of the eye. And tears are also antimicrobial. They contain an enzyme called lysozyme that helps to lyse microorganisms. The constant flow of saliva in the oral cavity, within the mouth and the throat, help to carry any microbes that happen to be present there to the stomach, where stomach acid is very corrosive and helps to destroy any organisms that are carried that way. And then vomiting, defecation also rid the body of any harmful substances or organisms. Within the respiratory tract, we have some special structures. We have cilia and hairs within the nasal passages. The cilia in the trachea helps to move mucus out of the lungs and then into the throat, where it can be coughed up or swallowed. And then in the genitourinary tract, urine, as it travels through the ureters from the kidneys to the bladder, helps to keep any microbes from growing in the ureters. Also, the process of urination flushes any organisms from the bladder and the urethra out of the body. Vaginal secretions also cleanse the lower reproductive tract. So these structures are components of the first line of defense. Another important part of the first line of defense is the body's microbiota, those normal flora organisms that inhabit and colonize certain spaces on the human body. That colonization helps to block access by pathogens to those epithelial surfaces, either on the skin or on the mucous membranes. And many of these normal flora create unfavorable environments, either by adjusting the pH or producing chemicals that limit competition. These organisms also help to train the immune cells that are part of the second and third lines of defense to help recognize those organisms that are safe and commensal, and help to keep populations of pathogenic organisms in check. There are also a number of chemical defenses that the body uses. These are non-specific, so they don't recognize specific organisms or specific structures on organisms. I mentioned lysozyme earlier. It's a component of tears and saliva, and this lyses the cell walls of microorganisms. Sweat, I also mentioned, sorry. It has a high lactic acid component, which makes the pH of sweat low. And most organisms, as I mentioned before, do not really like acidic environments. The skin also has a low pH because of the high fatty acid content of skin cells and secretions from the sebaceous glands. The digestive tract is also acidic, so the hydrochloric acid that's produced by the chief cells in stomach tissue, additional digestive enzymes, and bile that is released from the gallbladder all help to not only digest and break down the organic chemicals in your food, but they also help to kill any microorganisms. And then in the urogenital tract, semen has an antimicrobial component, and the pH of the vagina is acidic as well. So those chemicals are part of this first line of defense. And that is the end of section 12.1. So these are our checking in questions. Make sure you go through these and ensure that you can answer them correctly. Also, make sure you go back and review our learning objectives. Make sure that you understand what is being asked and that you're able to do those things, or that you know that information. Our critical thinking question is here. It says primary ciliary dyskinesia is a disease that affects the cilia that line the airways. The cilia in patients with this disease do not function to properly move contaminants and mucus out of the bronchi. How would this disease contribute to the patient's overall health? So consider that. Remember, cilia are part of the first line of defense. It's one of those structures in the respiratory system. So consider how, if these structures do not function properly to remove mucus from the bronchi, how would this contribute to the patient's overall health? Construct your response, and then the next slide in the PowerPoint contains the answers. So go in there and check and see how you did, and hopefully this video is helpful.